Zoning plays a huge role in the quality of life and the well-being of residents, as well as the sustainability of our environment and local economies. The National Zoning Atlas is an awesome, dynamic research collaborative that involves almost 60 institutions across a couple dozen project teams working at the state or regional level. We're collecting parcel-specific information about how all of our communities across the United States treat housing in particular. The reason that matters for housing policy and ultimately for reforms that will make housing more affordable is that we do not have a good understanding of how zoning enacted at the local level actually functions. We don't know whether it's minimum lot sizes or minimum parking requirements or maximum height caps that do the most damage when it comes to our ability to meet a housing shortage that affects every single community across America. The single-family only zone is more prominent in the United States than virtually any other country that has been studied. And so it's that separation of uses that actually leads to less economically stable communities. Because instead of mixing land uses and instead of mixing types of housing, we create communities that are purely dependent on one type of housing. Across the state of Connecticut, 91% of land is zoned to allow single-family zoning, while only 2% of land is zoned to allow 4 or more family zoning as of right. We do see that there are significant correlations in Connecticut between zoning and social and economic outcomes.
Connecticut is a very segregated state by both race and class, and our zoning practices are really good at continuing and perpetuating that segregation so that we have significant pockets of wealth and we have significant pockets of poverty. Here in Hartford, 90% of the population is Black and Latino. You can go one town or two towns to the west, and it's the direct opposite, where it's 90% white. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens by the historical legacy of zoning.
Everything that determines where you end up in life starts with where you're born, right? It starts with where you live. Education maps onto housing, the environment maps onto housing, your community is determined by the kind of housing that you have. People understanding what zoning is and how it works in a comparative fashion is an essential prerequisite to creating the kind of competitive environment where jurisdictions are actually incentivized to have more permissive zoning, to be a place that is easy to build in and that people want to build in and therefore to live in.
Zoning codes are local, they're very hard to read, they're often assembled across multiple different sources. They're just not the kinds of regulations that you can easily understand. That's why the work we do is so important. It's because we're trying to take things that have been in the dark just because of the way that they're assembled and put them into terms that the public can understand so that policymakers and people and advocates all around can do work on them.
You can really simply select, single-family housing and multifamily housing. It'll show up in, different colors. It'll become really apparent if your jurisdiction is simply not allowing the kind of density that other jurisdictions around you are.
Showing the zoning atlas, whether it's an elected official, a town official, neighborhood person, here's land use across the state. It's single-family housing. The entire map is purple, and all of a sudden you switch it and say, here's where you can have apartments or townhouses or smaller homes. There's absolutely that light bulb moment where you can't hide from those consequences of those decisions. Connecticut, to really respond to the kind of economic inequality we have, the racial segregation, the concerns about climate change, we just need to change. And we need to do that through land use reform. That's been a really powerful, I'll even say radicalizing experience for a lot of people, not just to say, wow, we really need to make changes, but also more importantly to say, I can be the change. I can actually help do this.
We've already seen the impact of National Zoning Atlas projects in local communities and states around the country. Out in Montana, in part because of the data collection of the Frontier Institute through the Montana Zoning Atlas, they're seeing the highest number of housing-related bills proposed in the state legislature ever. The National Zoning Atlas is democratizing, demystifying, and digitizing our nation's 30,000 or more zoning codes.